rest of this chapter, Tillich notes that a very important dimension of existentialism is a blurring of a distinction between subject and object. That goes along with that focus on the immediacy of experience. Now, notice it's blurring. He's not talking about that absolute identity that we have with the divine, according to Tillich. He's not talking about a mystical experience that you might have when you meditate and you lose consciousness of everything, but that pure oneness where all sense of time, space, subject, object are lost. But what he's talking about is this, and we talked about these philosophers that focused on essence, and Tillich is thinking, especially existentialists are especially thinking back to a man named René Descartes. He is the one who came up with that famous statement, "I think, therefore I am." Well, he came up with that statement when he had started to doubt everything. How do I know that what I've been told isn't just superstitions? How can I even believe my eyes, my hands? He was in a stove that stopped working one damp winter's day. How do I know that anything exists? And he made this absolute distinction between thinking substances, the human mind, and extended substances like this table or a body. So he did really make a very sharp distinction between subject and object, separated them in a way that they had never been quite separated in philosophy before. And what the existentialists are saying is that we've got to getting back to immediate experience, this distinction between subject and object is not as sharp. We're all in this together, subjects and objects, different subjects who are also objects to us. We're all in this together in more immediate experience. Now, remember we talked about the tendency of existentialism to say that, okay, there is no set human nature. We've got a lot of freedom. We've got total freedom. Yet, in trying to think about immediate experience, you do need to come up with some concepts that everybody can relate to, or existentialism is not going to be understandable. It's not going to be meaningful. And in its own way, existentialism tried to come up with its own categories, which in one sense are abstract because they are concepts, but they're trying to make them stick closer to our actual immediate experience. So they use psychological concepts, but they don't consider them to be just psychological, just something in my mind or your mind, but they also consider them to be ontological. You might remember that term, and now we're in a somewhat different context of that ontological approach that Tillich talked about. But ontological, in its root meaning, has to do with being, ontos, the nature of being. And so the existentialist thinkers are saying that there is something in the nature of being, in the nature of real existence, that we human beings are prone to be anxious. We all experience anxiety. We all experience guilt. We all experience despair at times. Those kinds of negative feelings are part of the human condition. They're part of the finite condition. So these psychological and at the same time ontological concepts are focusing on human finitude, human limitedness. Literally, finite means having an end. In some older novels, you have the Latin word fini at the end, the end. And the ultimate end is death for each finite human being in this finite created world, at least. And you remember about existentialism saying a decision is demanded, and a number of the existentialists pointed to death in one way as our friend, because if we had limitless time, then we could have more of this aesthetic attitude and never, or at least more rarely, get down to actually deciding to do something, because time is precious, time is limited. But death drives us to make these decisions, and the existentialists say not just make everyday decisions as individuals, but to make history, to be part of the process of making history. Well, when we talk about these psychological, ontological concepts, we also need to talk about loneliness. Some scholars have noted that existentialism is very individualistic. It's kind of the French existentialist who's dressed all in black and goes to the cafe and kind of sits and ruminates by himself. There's this sense of individualism and even indeed loneliness. And Tillich has an explanation for why loneliness is so emphasized by existentialists. He talks about a pervasive loss of community in Western culture. We've talked before about how for the existentialists, for many artists of the 20th century, the late 19th century, things have fallen apart. We've just become cogs in the machine. There's no longer a center. And part of this falling apart is the falling apart of the traditional communities, the traditional neighborhoods, the traditional groups people have been part of. Well, that allows us to cut to the chase now. Getting near the end of the chapter, Tillich summarizes existentialism as a protest against the rational system of thought and life by Western industrial society and philosophy. It's a lot of words, a big gulp there. The rational system, again, going back to that focus on reality as reason, as object of reason. The rational system of thought and of life by Western industrial society and philosophy. And here Tillich talks about three prongs of this system, again, to which existentialism is objecting. One, an analytic rationalism. And with this, everything becomes an object to be analyzed. We human beings lose our freedom as we are part of this analysis. And I might have gotten these reversed, but we're an object. And then B is we're all subject to either logical or a mechanistic naturalism. Everything happens by way of logic, psychological logic. Everything happens by cause and effect, physical cause and effect, what's happening in your brain. So again, we become a cog, just a part of the mechanism. And finally, secular humanism, saying that as a whole, we're just part of this finite machine, and there's no purpose but just this finite machine in and of itself. Existentialism is protesting against all of that. Tillich does see something positive. I mean, of course, it's positive in the first place to be able to protest against something that's negative and destructive. A society, a culture that's falling apart, that has fallen apart. But he also sees hope for something more positive to come in its wake, to pull things together in more of a synthesis of religion and culture, a holistic meaning. And it's at that point that he he talks about mysticism, the mystical again. This is page 107. The experience of this level of living is mystical. But just like when we talked about the blurring of subject-object, we're not talking about, an extreme religious mystical experience where we lose sight of everything, all subject-object, everything of the created world. But as Tillich puts it, what existentialism is trying to help us get is more a kind of Protestant mysticism, Tillich puts it. A mysticism of faith that's involved with everyday life in the world, but is trying to get in immediate touch and find a deep connection with that depth dimension, with that divine dimension of depth. As Tillich puts it, in this context, the term does not indicate a mystical union with the transcendent absolute, capital A. It signifies rather a venture of faith toward union with the depths of life, whether made by an individual or a group. And as he adds, we're trying to return to a pre-Cartesian attitude in which this sharp gulf between subject and object wasn't present, wasn't dominating things. The essence of objectivity, in that understanding, Tillich adds, could be found in the depth of subjectivity, in which God could be best approached through the soul. So, there is something positive that existentialism is pointing to, but it hasn't found it. It hasn't created that new cultural or religious meaning. So the role of existentialism is mainly negative, critical, prophetic, pointing out what's gone wrong with modern industrial or post-industrial, post-modern, but still consumer society. Tillich closes this chapter. Wait. There's one other thing I was going to bring up, so I'll get back to that in a second. I put this asterisk here so I would remember, and finally I have. Because we're not going to talk about Chapter 8. Won't be a mini lecture. You won't have a homework on Chapter 8, so do I hear the cheers? But that's on psychoanalysis or depth psychology. And in that chapter, Tillich does talk about the type of Western philosophy that focused on that side of essence that we talked about and saw, emphasizes consciousness, bringing everything into a conscious mind, explanation, ideas. But modern Western philosophy and theology ignored the unconscious on the other side. Well, psychology, psychoanalysis has opened up the unconscious. And that side is very much related to our immediate existence and these deep feelings of anxiety, guilt, despair, and so on. So Tillich sees psychoanalysis as very much connected with existentialism and also another ally with existentialism, along with the ally of modern art that's trying to critique what's gone wrong in Western society and maybe at least offering some hope, pointing the way to something new and better. So now I'll read that closing statement in which we talk about existentialism as mainly negative, critical, and prophetic. They are the expression of the great revolution within and against Western industrial society, which was prepared in the 19th century and is being carried out in the 20th. And I guess it's continued into the 21st, and we'll see where we go from here. The end of this one.